Hello, my name's Florence. Welcome to the theobspod. I'm an NHS obstetrician, hoping to share some thoughts and experiences about my working life. Perhaps you enjoy Call the Midwife, maybe birth fascinates you, or you're simply curious about what exactly an obstetrician is. You might be pregnant and preparing for birth. Perhaps you work in maternity and want to know what makes your obstetric colleagues tick, or you want some fresh ideas and inspiration. Whichever of these is the case, and for that matter, anyone else that's interested, the theobspod is for you. Episode 134. Safety Clutter. I have recently completed some new training for incident investigations. This is in line with the implementation of the new NHS Patient Safety Framework, or PSIRF. PSIRF was published in August 2022, and it lays out a contractual obligation for secondary providers to use a new format to investigate patient safety incidents. This replaces the old Serious Incident Framework that has been in place for many years. The training I've undertaken is a Level 2 Safety Investigation course provided for free by HSIB, the Health Safety Investigation Branch. It's quite a lengthy course, and I did enjoy it and learn a lot. But at the end of it, I thought, okay, I'm trained. This is a new way of thinking and a new way of investigating. But I couldn't help thinking, is my hospital, are the rest of my team, and is the NHS more broadly ready for this? So today I thought I would explore my reflections on completing the course and my thoughts about the shift in thinking that's going to be required to properly implement PSIRF. If you look at the PSIRF document, it describes it as a fundamental shift in how the NHS responds to patient safety incidents for learning and improvement. The first radical change is that unlike the Serious Incident Framework, it doesn't prescribe what we should be investigating. In the old way, certain things were incidents that would trigger a serious incident investigation. At one point, any postpartum bleeding more than 2 litres had to be a serious incident investigation. That's just an example. But there are many others. So if a certain event occurred, we would have to undertake a serious incident investigation. And if other incidents happened that were not prescribed by the Serious Incident Framework, we would undertake what we called a local investigation. We used root cause analysis, and we would write a long timeline and a report analysing what happened moment by moment and trying to unpick what had happened, why it might have happened, and what we could do to prevent it from happening again. That sounds like common sense, but actually, is it useful? Much of what we ended up with at the end is so-called safety clutter. I absolutely loved the idea of safety clutter that we came across on the course. Safety clutter is defined as the accumulation of safety procedures, documents, roles and activities that are performed in the name of safety but do not contribute to the safety of operations. Safety clutter is a problem because what it does is cause a lot of ineffective activity, which results in a lack of confidence in safety and safety investigations, and actually can hamper innovation and get in the way of getting safety work done. And there are quite a lot of articles written about safety clutter. So my first reflection on the training was, oh my goodness, almost everything we've been doing up to now is safety clutter. There is a whole industry of safety clutter. We have a risk newsletter. We have rewriting guidelines. We have individual feedback. We have changes to training. And sadly, much of this would be categorised as safety clutter. So what does PSIRF advocate? The idea is that it should have a coordinated and data-driven approach to patient safety incidents that prioritises compassionate engagement with those affected by patient safety incidents. And that includes not only patients affected, relatives, family members, but also staff involved. And then the idea is it should embed patient safety incident response within the wider system of improvement, prompting a significant cultural shift towards systemic patient safety management. Sounds great, doesn't it? Why do I think this might be so difficult for us? The PSIRF document then goes on to discuss 4 key aims. First, compassionate engagement and involvement of those affected by patient safety incidents. And as I've just said, that isn't just the patient. That is staff too. That's a radical change. Application of a range of system-based approach to learning from patient safety incidents. And I'll come on to that system-based approach in more detail. Considered and proportionate responses to patient safety incidents. Okay, sounds sensible. And then supportive oversight focused on strengthening response systems, functioning and improvement. Okay, can't argue with any of that. That all sounds like common sense. So why am I saying it's a massive shift? What have I learnt? I think the first fundamental change for me is the idea of work as done rather than work as prescribed or work as imagined. In an old style investigation, we would look at what happened. We would decide as a panel whether we thought that's what should have happened or not. And we would have gone back and checked the current guideline and seen what the guideline said and compare what happened and what we thought with what the guideline said. And then if people hadn't followed the guideline, rather than questioning why haven't they followed the guideline, we might come out at the end with a comment that people should follow the guideline. Or maybe we would find that the guideline didn't prescribe what people should have been doing, and we would come out with a recommendation maybe of updating the guideline, maybe adding a bit or making a bit clearer, because obviously people weren't following the guideline because it wasn't clear enough maybe. But the training introduced the idea of work as done. To me, this was a really interesting concept. The idea that guidelines expect that we're working in a very stable environment. We've got the ideal staffing levels. We've got the ideal equipment. We're in a good place ourselves. And we see human beings as the people that introduce the human error within the system, rather than thinking that actually we're working in a highly variable situation. When I turn up to labour ward, one day there may be a lot of women in labour, and another day there might be nearly none. One day there might be no beds. One day there might be a shortage of equipment. So I'm not working in a stable environment. I'm working in a very variable, complex environment. And therefore, actually, if I adapt and I don't quite follow the guidance, I do something different, it may be that actually I'm improving on the safety aspects because I'm able to vary my work as done compared with the work prescribed, taking into account the other factors on that day. I've included a great little video from NHS Scotland website by Stephen Shorrock, who describes this idea of work as prescribed, work as done, work as imagined. And it's a very short video, and I really recommend having a quick watch because it's eye-opening to me. And it's not just, are we ready for this idea? Are our patients ready? I've sat in incident investigation feedback sessions with families and had to explain incident reports. And in the past, when we've written that people didn't follow the guideline or the guideline wasn't clear on this particular minute point, I've even had parents ask me, well, why don't staff follow the guideline? Are they not trained properly? Of course they should be following the guideline. Why are they not following the national standard of care or the prescribed standard of care within your own hospital? And trying to explain to people that actually it's just sometimes not possible to follow every dot of the I and every cross of the T in every guideline all the time perfectly. I've struggled to explain that, and I've struggled not to make it sound like we've really let people down badly. So this idea of work as done versus work as prescribed, I think is a really useful concept for me and may help me not only be a better investigator, but explain things better to people under my care. So for me, that concept was a major game changer in my thinking. The next big change is the idea of a systems framework, and the PSIRF refers to SEEPs as the main framework that they're suggesting one uses. SEEPs stands for Systems Engineering Initiative for Patient Safety. Sounds quite complicated. And there are various versions of SEEPs. And I've included in the programme notes a really great little article called SEEPs 101 and 7 Simple SEEPs Tools, which I suggest you maybe have a look at. The idea of SEEPs, of work systems with tools, tasks, people and environments, is not new to me. It is something that I have seen previously used, but I've been trying to use it without any real understanding of what it is and how it works. Why is this? Well, many of us in maternity are involved in feeding in information to Embrace that looks at the stillbirth and neonatal death rate, the perinatal mortality. And as part of this, there's a template we use, a tool, the Perinatal Mortality Review Tool, or PMRT. And many midwives and doctors listening to this will know that actually the tool can feel quite infuriating because it has drop-down boxes. And when you complete the questions about the care that the woman has received during pregnancy and labour, you're restricted to categorising things. And now I understand a little bit about SEEPs, I can see that the categories I have been forced to select are the SEEPs categories. So clearly the PMRT tool is designed with SEEPs in mind, that we're looking at systems learning, which makes sense because it's collating information from lots of different hospitals up and down the country to try and learn and make a valuable report that has overarching safety learning, not just for us as an organisation or an individual case. But I'm not aware that there was any training when this was introduced. Maybe there was and I missed it, but I've done a lot of these reports and reviews without really understanding what I was doing. And it would frustrate me because I would have to look at and think about what category all these different things fell into. And now, when I look at the SEEPs model, and I look at the huge list of different things that I might need to consider, I can see, obviously, they're running through the checklist for SEEPs. An example might be if you were to look at things under tools and technology, it lists things such as usability, accessibility, familiarity, level of automation, portability and functionality, maintenance. Well, a lot of those things don't mean anything to me. I don't know what they're talking about. Person. Am I looking at individual characteristics such as psychological impact, frustration, stress, burnout, cognitive factors, attention, memory, confusion, preferences, knowledge, competence, skills, physiological factors, illness, dehydration, physical strengths and needs, collective characteristics such as team cohesiveness. I mean, this is all from the SEEPs quick reference guide that I've enclosed in the programme notes. I mean, without any training, how would I possibly know? And also, doing reviews the way we currently do them, where we look at the patient's notes and we perhaps get some statements from people, how would I possibly know any of those things? I don't know if someone had had a drink that day, whether they were exhausted. How could I possibly know that? So the SEEPs framework, I now understand what it is. I couldn't say that I feel confident I can use it correctly. In some of the exercises I did on the training course, I ended up putting things in all sorts of wrong categories, and my attempts to analyse things using SEEPs did not match those of the tutors on the course. So I would say I'm at the bottom of a learning curve. I'm currently consciously incompetent, and probably it's only going to come with practice and using things again and again that I'm going to be able to successfully make this shift. But at least I understand what I'm now trying to do. I'm consciously incompetent, rather than the first stage, which is I was unconsciously incompetent. So I guess that's an improvement. As I've mentioned, we previously would be using the person's notes and possibly statements. So we would ask staff to write statements that would give us additional information, maybe a bit of context, stuff that wasn't in the notes. And I must admit, I've always slightly dragged my heels with statements. They often don't add anything, and I would only write a statement if I felt there was something missing, something that wasn't already documented in the notes and that I felt was important additional information. But the whole idea of PSIRF and systems thinking is to chuck out statements. Statements are useless, and to switch to interviews. So we're going to end up deciding which are the key people, if any, to interview, and to actually have them sitting in front of us for us to prepare in advance and think what are the questions we need to ask them to make sure they feel well supported during an interview, and to then be able to directly have a conversation with them about, why did you do that? What were you thinking at that time? What was the context? Why did you take that action rather than this action? Tell me, was that piece of equipment working correctly? Were you familiar with it? Had you used it before? What were the problems you encountered? What was happening on that day? How were you feeling? A much broader range of things that we can look at. I'm slightly hesitant about this idea of interviews because I've been subjected to interviews as part of HSIB investigations, and it's clear to me that HSIB, from their training course, very much are having this systems approach. And they discuss interviews about not feeling punitive, but feeling supportive and listening to staff and really trying to unpick and understand the way things happened and why they happened that way. But having been the subject of HSIB investigation interviews, I can't say that I experienced the interviews like that, despite the fact that there's good information given to you before the interview about the context and how it's going to be, and the idea that it's a no-blame culture and that it's very much to find out what happened. I certainly felt like I was being quizzed and had to very much justify my actions. It didn't feel supportive and exploratory in really understanding me and what was happening on that day and why I took the action I took. It very much felt like, why didn't you do X, Y, Z? And me having to very much justify my thinking. And as I'm an emotional person, I'm not ashamed to say that I have cried in my HSIB interviews. I've found them very emotional and very difficult. So I can't say that I can see interviews as being an easy step to take in helping staff feel more supported, or as outlined in the idea of PSIRF, that there's compassionate engagement with those affected by patient safety incidents. I can't say that I feel I've particularly been passionately engaged with. I think my possibly final reflection is that they're very clear that recommendations do not need to be solutions. And in the old style of investigating, very much we were expected to make recommendations that would change the outcome. Recommendations that if we implement these, and then we would have an action plan to make sure we implemented them, that this would make a difference. And this brings me back to the safety clutter idea. Pretty much all our recommendations would be safety clutter. Feedback to this person, talk through the case with that person, put it in the risk newsletter, present the case at a governance meeting, have a discussion, change this guideline or implement this new policy, and then reinforce it all. And the idea that a recommendation might be much less specific. For example, when I was trying to do the practice recommendations in the course, my brain automatically goes to solutions. I found it very difficult to make a recommendation and not a solution. But this is important because what they're saying is recommendations should then feed into improvement work. And then from the improvement work, you get solutions. So the idea that this investigation should link directly to the improvement work within the hospital is really different. And at the moment, they're not. They're kind of two separate things, which sounds a bit mad, but quality improvement is sort of separate from the whole risk governance process. Quality improvement is kind of big projects where sometimes it might come from a risk investigation. that we need to change something, but a lot of quality improvement is coming from other things, new national guidance or problems rather than a specific incident. So we're going to have to scrap an enormous amount of the way we do things around here in terms of safety clutter. And the other big difference with our recommendations is we have been encouraged usually to think about things within our control. So we would make recommendations of things that we could change within the department. We would never make a recommendation that might be something that might have to be taken by the hospital more broadly, and certainly not something that might need to be done at a higher level, such as regional or national. That wouldn't be our remit. It's not within our control. There'd be no point making that recommendation. So we would make recommendations of things that we could actually do. And they wouldn't be things like get more staff or change the maintenance program or buy new pieces of equipment, because we knew that just wasn't in our control and we're on a very limited budget and we can't do any of those things, which is probably why we fall back on the safety clutter of let's train more people to use the equipment that we've got better and hope that the same problem doesn't happen, rather than thinking, well, actually, this is a radically different idea, that actually this piece of equipment isn't fit for purpose and we need a whole different way of doing this. So recommendations that can be collated and used to make bigger system change is a massive shift for us. And I think my final reflection on that is, how is that actually going to happen? How is the hospital and the NHS as a whole going to collate all these different outcomes from our PSIRF investigations and make them make bigger whole-scale change? Because let's face it, that's what actually needs to happen. So my reflection on doing the training was I learned a lot. I think there could be massive benefits in moving away from the safety clutter, which I have felt for a long time has been really not making big strides forward in improving safety, and very much felt like a blame culture, even though it was labelled a no blame culture. But I think the work to implement PSIRF and getting not only us as lead investigators, but also the hospital, those higher up in the trust, the executive team and board, and then how things get collated even higher up, will be challenging. And I can see that it's going to take us a significant amount of time to implement this new approach. I've included lots of things in the programme notes, and my zesty bit would be to go and explore those. There's lots online about this whole new framework. And if you're involved in incidents in any way, even if you're not investigating, if you're a member of staff who may be interviewed or may be reflecting on your daily work, to understand that there is this seismic shift going on, I think would be really beneficial, and understanding what your role is within that. And also for women and families using maternity services, I think if you can understand the key idea of work as done versus work as prescribed or work as imagined, and that actually we work in a very complex variable system and we really are trying to do our best, and that we're trying to make quite a big shift in how we investigate incidents and problems when they happen, and that you need to bear with us, because actually we are trying to be, certainly in my organisation, and I would hope everywhere, open and honest and trying to learn from our mistakes. It is difficult. It's not as straightforward as saying we should have followed this, that and the other guideline. So bear with us, work with us, because by you feeding into incidents and being interviewed and being willing to be part of this process, you will really help us hopefully improve safety in a much more useful way than we currently are with the way we're currently investigating things. I very much hope you found this episode of the theobspod interesting. If you have, it'd be fantastic if you could subscribe, rate and review on whatever platform you find your podcasts, as well as recommending the theobspod to anyone you think might find it interesting. There's also tons of episodes to explore in my back catalogue, from clinical topics, my career and journey as an obstetrician, and life in the NHS more generally. I'd like to assure women I care for that I take confidentiality very seriously and take great care not to use any patient identifiable information unless I have expressly asked the permission of the person involved on that rare occasion when it's been absolutely necessary. If you found this episode interesting and want to explore the subject a little more deeply, don't forget to take a look at the programme notes where I've attached some links. If you want to get in touch to suggest topics for future episodes, you can find me at theobspod on Twitter and Instagram, and you can email me theobspod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.